Dear friends of the gallery, today I am reporting on the exhibition Spatiality, the second exhibition after German ritualism in 2017, that was curated for us by the German-Spanish artist Ignacio Uriarte, whom I represent, as you know. It brings together works by 12 international artists, which Uriarte has subsumed under the term Spatiality. In Spatiality, we are showing artists from Brazil, Germany, Great Britain, Iceland, Italy, Mexico, Portugal and Turkey. The time frame ranges from earlier artistic positions such as Charlotte Posenenske and Alan Charton to Almut Hilf, who was born in 1980. Uriarte brings together artistic positions that do not take space for granted, but rather shape it, analyze it and question its social and sensory dimensions. The exhibition focuses in particular on the relationship between sculpture, architecture and spatial perception. We are standing here at the entrance to the exhibition in front of a work by Almut Hilf. It is part of a larger series for which Hilf received the International Marianne Brandt Prize and the Anne Biermann Prize for Contemporary Photography in 2016 and 2017. The title of the series is, in German, Denken im Bestand, a phrase that can be translated as reflecting within the existing situation. In any case, this translation reflects the way the works were created, which are a hybrid of photography, photocopy, collage and digital art. Photographs and photocopies of architectural forms and situations are repeatedly rearranged in analog form and photographed again, so that the image increasingly departs from the representation of architecture, and the collage, created both analogously and digitally, forms a new image that is essentially independent of the original image. Only very minor elements, like sockets, for instance, or door handles, ultimately remind us of what was the starting point for these works. During the exhibition setup, Ignacio Uriarte described the first exhibition space as the grey room. Here, spatiality is depicted in a very reduced abstract form. Charlotte Posenenske's work, for example, consists of a grey rectangular aluminum panel folded diagonally once. Its spatial aura is difficult to capture, either in photography or here in film. Since Posenenske considered the interaction of the recipients of her art, she created spaces as a social act. Theoretically, the work could also be hung differently by the viewers if conservation conditions allowed it. Alan Charton, who since 1970 has reduced painting to monochrome grey panels, each with an internal distance of 4.5 centimeter, also expands the idea of an image to include a sculptural aspect. A relief emerges that is defined by the spatial relationships of its element to one another. Through the spatiality, the image also has a three-dimensional effect, engaging into a somewhat corporeal relationship with the viewer, who, depending on their respective perspective, gain a slightly different view of the ensemble whenever they move around the work. Diogo Pimentao's work, Death Disjunction No. 3, consists of a very elongated cement slab leaning obliquely against the wall, and another slab, made of steel, perhaps, held in a suspended position by the cement slab on the wall. Pimentao plays with our imagination here, suggesting that the second block is made of steel, when in fact it is made of cardboard folded into this shape and colored with graphite. In this way, he alludes to sculptures by Richard Serra, whose elements sometimes hold themselves in position by their own weight, but at the same time he uses a material that would have been unthinkable for Serra. Marcia Scalan, on the other hand, focuses on the picture frame, the spatial boundaries of the image, the distinction between image and object, and visual illusions or irritations. We believe we see a grey painted image that has been turned and shifted out of its frame. In fact, however, what we see is, within the frame, a grey glass pane that has been trimmed at the corners and, outside the frame, painted additions that restore the turned rectangle. A clear definition of image and frame is undermined here by a spatial intervention. Let us summarize that the works in this first room not only allow visitors to experience spatiality as a physical presence, but also play with perception, interaction, illusion, and materiality. We move on to the second and largest room of the exhibition. The works in this room invite us to change our perspective, whether physically or mentally, in our approach to space and perception. Felipe Cohen's installation Puente, Portuguese for sunset, is playful and clever, suggesting that we are seeing exactly that, a sunset depicted in felt in a frame tilted from the wall. In fact, however, it is the reflection of the felt standing on the glass plate and the small felt element within the frame that create the supposed representation of the setting sun, an illusion. Hardly any visitor refrains from trying to gain insight by crouching down and looking into the glass case. Without illusion or trickery, Jelena Popova once again shows us the difference between a painted image and a physical object consisting of three elements, two canvases and a piece of wood. On the one hand, we see the ensemble of the three parts, and on the other, a barely tangible spatial representation of something that is not clearly defined. Painted, it seems, rising bubbles whose material remains abstract. So we do not have a pictorial representation of something that exists in reality, such as soap bubbles or air bubbles, but rather the idea of a bubble-shaped ascent that has become an image. Far removed from intellectual abstraction is José Davila's untitled installation, which is modest in size but no less powerful for that, consisting of a stone cube placed at an angle on a boulder. Apart from the fact that the cube is hollow and can therefore be physically manipulated rather easily, nothing is predetermined here. However, the arrangement can be read as a metaphor for the relationship between civilization and chaos, the wild and the tamed, between architecture and nature. The fact that the position of the cube depends on nature, is only given by nature, can make us think about our world and the also spatial relationships between the various elements. Valerie Krause's installations also take place primarily in space in a very obvious way. The burlap cloths, reinforced and dyed with plaster, hang at a distance from the room's walls on a steel and wood construction. Cuts and folds in the fabric transform the image into an object characterized by a tension between emptiness and form. The last room of our exhibition is dedicated to works that have a relatively strong connection to social realities and visualize this spatially. In general, Zakir Göççebek uses a specific form of arrangement, sequences, groupings, cuts, etc., to place everyday objects in unusual, spatial, sometimes humorous, sometimes formal contexts in his works. With the carpet reorientation, which we have on display, he also negotiates a visual stereotype of Middle Eastern and Mediterranean culture. One might say that by spatially interfering with the integrity of the carpet, he makes us think about the relationship between immigrants and Germany. Finnbogi Pettersson's installation, on the other hand, visualizes something that we usually perceive with our sense of hearing, sound, which travels through the air in the form of waves and hits our eardrums and indeed our entire body shell. A vibrating membrane generates such waves almost without producing any sound and makes them visible with the help of a loosely stretched rubber band. Pettersson's installation thus makes the spatially expanding phenomenon of sound waves in different frequencies visible. Finally, we present an installation by Arcangelo Sassolino. Here, two physical forces act against each other. The steel screw clamp, which presses against a stack of paper with apparently extremely strong tightening, squeezing and deforming the stack to a certain point. It is deformed to such an extent that a moiré effect is created by the multitude of pages in the undulating stack of paper. At a certain point, however, the density of the compressed paper becomes so great that even the steel yields and bends. This action and reaction can easily evoke associations with social conditions. So I invite you to give free rein to your imagination. Let me conclude with a few words of thanks that are particularly appropriate on this occasion. First of all, I would like to thank all the artists involved who embarked on the adventure of this exhibition and supported Ignacio Uriarte and his project, and thus us too, in the most generous manner with their willingness to participate. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the galleries that loaned me works or gave them to me on commission. It would take too long to list them all here by name, but you will find them all listed in the exhibition dossier, which you can download from our website. And finally, my special thanks go to Ignacio Uriarte, who's the mastermind behind the exhibition and to whom I owe, for the second time now, a project that could just as easily have been shown in a Kunsthalle. You still have the opportunity to see the exhibition in our gallery until August 30, and I cordially invite you to visit. Thanks for watching. Best regards. Bye-bye.